Today, again, I want to thank our co-sponsor, the Common Ministry, and Tim Pullitz for, I think we've been doing this now for about 5 or 6 years at least, and these have always been great events, and so I want to thank them, and we are thrilled to partner with them in bringing speakers to campus. Our speaker today is Robin Meyers. He's been the senior minister of the Mayflower Congregational Church in Oklahoma City for 34 years. He's been a distinguished professor of social justice in the philosophy department at Oklahoma City for 28 years, a fellow at the West Star Institute for 15 years, and he's given over 100 endowed lectures in the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and Australia. He is the author of 8 books about religion in American society. He's become widely known as an advocate for peace and justice and radical hospitality as the focus of faith. Today he's going to be talking about climate change as a moral imperative. Join me now in welcoming Robin Meyers to the Holy Institute.
Wow, okay. Thank you all so much for bringing me here. I've never been here before, and it's beautiful, beautiful country, especially the way you know how to plow on a hillside, which we do not know how to do that in Oklahoma. I also love being on college campuses because really there is no more beautiful place on the earth than a college campus. So all these people walking around, reading and thinking and asking questions, would that the whole country could be more like a university. Those of us who teach are also very fortunate. We're blessed. And so as I'm talking, I want you to be thinking about the questions you want to ask and the conversation that we'll have following my talk, which will be about 25, 30 minutes. I really seriously want to hear from you. To begin, I'm guessing that you don't know a whole lot about Oklahoma, but I suspect that what you do know comes from the lyrics of the Broadway musical Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plains and the waving wheat can sure smell sweet when the wind comes right behind the rain, right? That's probably mostly how you know Oklahoma. And it is indeed flat, it's windy, it has fiercely changeable weather, and we get more than our share of tornadoes. There are also a lot of deeply conservative folk who live in Oklahoma. We have more pickup trucks than people, and it is the reddest of the red states. We love country music, we love football, and we love anyone in a uniform. None of this should be surprising to you, but I'd be willing to bet that there's one thing about Oklahoma that you do not know, and that will come as something of a shock. Central Oklahoma, where I live in Oklahoma City, is the earthquake capital of the world. I know, you're thinking, what? It's true. We have hundreds of small earthquakes every year, but not because we are on a major fault line. It's for another reason altogether. And do you know what that reason would be? Fracking. This is a smart group. It's because of the way we extract oil and gas that dominates our state's economy. It is called hydraulic fracturing, better known by its slang descriptor, fracking. Whoops, I think I just hit a button and I shouldn't have. Should I stop it? Yeah. That's the problem with having a computer to put your manuscript on. Sooner or later, it's going to hit the wrong button.
Go on the screen and then
Yes. Hover over the picture.
go in there. There.
Get a student up here.
And then you can pull the bar back.
Yeah, pull the bar back there and then just hit stop. And I will not lay this down on that again.
We're still not there.
I'll do it this. I'm going to do it this way.
He's way over. What is that?
Where were we? Fracking. We're talking about fracking. Everyone's heard of fracking, of course, and obviously you all have. What you may not know is how harmful it is to the earth. It's harmful in ways we had not imagined because we've been conducting an experiment. First, because fracking works when trillions of gallons of chemical-laden water gets pumped deep into the earth under enormous pressure and cracks open or fractures once inaccessible reserves of oil and gas. It's created a kind of petroleum gold rush in the place where I live, and burning those fossil fuels, of course, contributes to global climate change, but earthquakes come from a different source altogether. They don't come from the fact that we're extracting the oil and gas, but what we do afterwards. So after the extraction occurs, we dispose of all the fracking fluid in the cheapest way possible. Instead of repurposing it, as some states require, we just re-inject it back into the earth, more than a mile underground. We pump this ocean of what's called slick water, ironically, back into the cavities where the oil and gas has come from. It is the cheapest way to get rid of all this water. And there it kind of sloshes around deep under the earth and changes the balance of subterranean rock formations. It literally lubricates the small fault lines that have always been there until they slip, just as your hands would slip more easily if you had water on them. And once the shaking starts, other fault lines are affected, fault lines which the oil and gas companies did not even bother to map before they started fracking. Because as it turns out, whether above ground or underneath, everything in this quantum world really is connected to everything else. In 2015, there were 900 earthquakes in central Oklahoma that registered 3.0 or above on the Richter scale.
Wow.
900. We used to have 3 and we couldn't even feel them. Foundations have cracked, steeples have fallen off churches, which sounds like a sign from God to me. And natural gas explosions have killed people who never thought they had to purchase earthquake insurance to live in Oklahoma. Our country western singers would say there's a whole lot of shaking going on. And what, you might ask, has this got to do with the challenge of global climate change as a moral imperative? The answer lies in the most basic assumptions we make about what we can and should do to the earth we live on, the earth from which we've all evolved and from which we can never be separated, this spaceship that we're riding on through this endless night of an endless universe. This is the only home we have. So my first question for you to start thinking about today is this: is taking care of what we did not make any more than we made ourselves a strategic matter, a political matter, a moral matter, or is it all three? A second question is this: do you have to be a person of faith to consider our response to global climate change a moral imperative? Could you be an atheist, for example, and still believe that you are compelled to act because it's the right thing to do? A third question is this: does faith help or hinder our efforts to confront and address global climate change? So, is the church, for example, a friend or a foe in this battle? As it turns out, the Christian faith has played a central role in the debate because of our fundamental belief that creation is a gift to human beings, and that the earth itself is a kind of vast warehouse of resources for our exploitation. This assertion comes very early in the Bible, in Genesis 1:27. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have, here's the key word, dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. That single word, dominion, has been translated from the Hebrew word radah, which is used elsewhere in the Bible to mean that humans have been granted power and authority over others, really over everything except God. Similar conclusions may be drawn from the phrase to subdue the earth. The verb subdue comes from the Hebrew kavash, which likewise depicts a hierarchical relationship in which humans are positioned above the earth and are granted special power to control everything that is, if you will, beneath them. Both these terms are used elsewhere in Scripture to describe rule over one's enemies, over which the Israelites would, with God's help, exercise dominion and subdue. Okay, so just think about that. Not surprisingly, in the ancient world, where nature was often the enemy of life itself through drought, plagues, famine, and floods, a desire to believe that God had established a human over nature hierarchy is understandable. How else would the human race survive? Someone had to be in charge. And so humans put themselves in charge of creation, and then, in my opinion, wrote the poetry of Genesis in such a way that it sounds like God was doing the talking. Here is the hierarchy. God above humans, humans above animals, animals above all inanimate things, like plants, rocks, and trees. So men made themselves the governors of the natural world. Furthermore, God has put all of this stuff here for us, and we should help ourselves to it, especially when we can sell it. We can and we must use the resources of the earth, we know that, but only if our relationship with the natural world is sustainable, and science now tells us it is not. There were, of course, so few humans on the planet in those days when the Bible was written that we could not do much damage, nor did we have the technology to fundamentally alter the environment. But we do now. And this idea of this divinely sanctioned hierarchy, which is as dangerous, I think, as the idea of chosenness, which implies that others are unchosen, means that not only are humans above nature, but they're also free to expand the hierarchies to include other humans as well, which is how we got male above female, white above non-white, European above non-European, straight above gay, and so forth. Humans, we love ourselves some hierarchy. It's how we know that there's a place for everything, and that everything and everyone should know its place and stay in it. Unfortunately, the fact that everything, and even more so everyone, does not stay in its place, or their place, is largely the story of human history. We have any history majors in here? I'm going to tell you a very simple way to think about human history. Do you remember the simple, sort of timeless game you used to play as kids called King of the Mountain? You would just find a dirt pile, or any kind of a pile, and someone would climb to the top of it and declare himself King of the Mountain. But the others who were further down at the bottom, trying to get up, they'd all climb their way to the top and throw off the king of the mountain, whereupon he would declare himself the new king of the mountain, or she would, and this would go on until one smart kid figured out when he was at the top of the mountain, he would stop the game. And just freeze everyone in their positions below or beneath him, and from his perch on top he would declare game over. But the rest of the kids would say, oh no you don't, play on. And that, my friends, is the story of human history. Someone is always trying to stop the game when they are on top, and the rest of us say, no, play on. Which brings me, oddly enough, to a young woman from Sweden named Greta Thunberg. Do you know her?
Yeah.
Okay. Most of you do. You know she's a climate activist. Yeah. She's 16 years old. On these things we can all agree. But some people also think of her as a prophet. And that's something else I would like you to think about for the balance of our time together, along with the other questions I've posed or will pose. Is Greta Thunberg a prophet? And what does it mean to say that? If so, what makes a person a prophet? How do you know a prophet when you see one? Or even when you use that word, at least outside of religious traditions, like we often do to describe someone who's just correctly predicted the future. Oh, you're a prophet, or you're very prophetic, which is not exactly the same thing as what religious folks mean when they talk about prophets. In August 2018, Greta Thunberg, then 15, started a school strike for the climate outside the Swedish parliament that has since spread around the world. Now involves over 100,000 school children. She spoke recently at the United Nations Climate Action Summit and made quite an impression, in part because she made absolutely no effort to ingratiate herself to world leaders or to anyone else for that matter. She just said what was on her mind. Let's watch this short clip and then we will continue. I broke it once, I don't want to break it again.
She's in the middle.
Your sound?
This is all wrong.
Louder. Louder.
I shouldn't be up here.
Okay, good question. What is
I should be
this?
back in school, on the other side of the ocean. Yet, you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams, my childhood, with your empty words. And yet, I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction. And all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away and come here saying that you're doing enough when the politics and solutions needed are still nowhere in sight? You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. No matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe. The popular idea of cutting our emissions in half in 10 years only gives us a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees and the risk of setting off irreversible chain reactions beyond human control. 50% may be acceptable to you, but those numbers do not include tipping points, most feedback loops, additional warming hidden by toxic air pollution, or the aspects of equity, climate justice. We also rely on my generation sucking hundreds of billions of tons of your CO2 out of the air with technologies that barely exist. So a 50% risk is simply not acceptable to us, we who have to live with the consequences. To have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees global temperature rise, the best odds given by the IPCC, the world had 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit back on January 3rd, 2018. Today that figure is already down to less than 350 gigatons. How dare you pretend that this can be solved with just business as usual and some technical solutions? With today's emissions levels, that remaining CO2 budget will be entirely gone within less than 8.5 years. There will not be any solutions or plans presented in line with these figures here today, because these numbers are too uncomfortable, and you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us. But young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you. We will not let you get away with this. Right here, right now, is where we draw the line. The world is waking up, and change is coming, whether you like it or not. Thank you.
I'm sorry that wasn't louder. I hope you got to hear most of what she said. I can say that one of the characteristics of a prophet in the biblical tradition. Can I just close it? Yeah. I'll just close it. That's it. One of the characteristics of a prophet in the biblical tradition is that he, or in this case, she, tells us something we would rather not hear. She tells us the painful truth, and this young woman offers absolutely no false hope. We don't like to hear the truth about ourselves if it indicates that we are in complicity with something unacceptable, because we want to think of ourselves as good people, people who do consider the future and what it will be like for our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids. And you may have noticed something about our culture. We are inordinately proud of our children, but we are surprisingly unwilling to make any real sacrifices for them. I've learned this over my lifetime. We love children in theory. And in church, I've learned this lesson as well. People kind of like to talk in the church about young people and how they're the future, you know. Meanwhile, we let our public schools fall into shameful disrepair. We cut spending to pay for tax cuts for people who already are rich, and then we make corporations pay no taxes at all, leaving out young people. They are the future, you know. They grow up now without art teachers or drama teachers or counselors or even nurses. And we don't want anyone saying, shame on us, but isn't that what prophets have always done? They've said, shame on you. And I find it interesting that the people we call prophets today are people who all live safely in the distant past. I asked my seminary professor once to define a prophet, and this is what he said. A prophet is a visionary after his time. Because during his time, he's a nuisance at best, at worst, an intolerable and even obnoxious iconoclast, attacking the foundations of what makes this country great, or we assume that he or she is just mentally unstable, or so consumed with anger and the need for attention that what, in this case, she really needs is medication, not an audience. Greta Thunberg has been diagnosed in all these ways, and even her parents have been blamed for raising her poorly and causing her to become a mean girl. A few weeks ago in church, we read as the text for the sermon some verses that describe the call of Jeremiah, a famous Old Testament prophet you may have heard of whether you go to church or not. In the Bible, the call of any prophet always works by the same familiar storyline. Nobody just gets up one morning and has a really good breakfast and decides, I think I'll be a prophet. God actually calls them, and to the last man they are reluctant. God always urges them forward by a promise to be with them, give them the words to say, and protect them. Since, as we know, we stone our prophets to death, or we hang them, or we crucify them. So here are some of the words that launched the career of the prophet Jeremiah, who everyone knows now was a great prophet way back then. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. Then I said, this is Jeremiah now speaking about himself, Lord God, truly I do not know how to speak, for I am only a boy. But the Lord said to me, do not say I'm only a boy, For you shall go to all to whom I send you, and you shall speak whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you, says the Lord. Then the Lord put out his hand and touched my mouth. And the Lord said to me, now I've put my words in your mouth. See, today I appoint you over nations and over kingdoms, to pluck up and to pull down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant. Now my paraphrase of that is, God says, go get them, sick them. I've got your back. That's a kind of modern paraphrase, but it's, I think, what the text is saying. Now, if you are a Bible nerd, you know that this isn't the first time, nor will it be the last time, that someone tries to get out of a job of being a prophet and speaking truth to power by claiming that they are not good public speakers. Moses tried it. He said, Pharaoh will never listen to me because I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Which brings me back to Greta. She is not, in the classic sense, a gifted public speaker. She is not someone who looks like a celebrity or is full of charisma, like people who go dancing with the stars or perform on The Voice or America's Got Talent. And those eyes of hers, did you notice? Those eyes of hers are so intense as to be almost unnerving. She is both, on the one hand, difficult to watch, and on the other hand, impossible to look away from. But as far as we know, she did not hesitate to step up to this unlikely role of hers by making any excuses about her capacity. I'm only a girl, and I don't speak very well. She has Asperger's syndrome, but she does not consider it a deficiency. She actually said in one of her TED Talks that being on the autism spectrum makes it impossible for her to lie. That's fascinating to me, and that's something for us to think about. That a disability makes her more honest, while those of us who are normal are able to lie pretty much all the time and effortlessly. It reminds me of a teacher I had in seminary who said that temptation always increases as talent increases. That is, we are most tempted to do wrong at the level of ability, not at the level of disability. So an eloquent man can become also an eloquent liar. So is Greta's disability a gift in disguise? Is Greta a prophet with pigtails? Or is she, as her detractors have said, just a really unhappy little girl whose parents have ruined her? I want you to weigh in on this in just a minute. I've also heard people say that she is just so strange. So strange. What a strange little girl. But when compared to all these heroic figures from Scripture, she's got nothing on the strangeness of the biblical prophets. Isaiah stripped off all his clothes and wandered around naked just to get people's attention. Jeremiah hid his underwear in a rock and once put a cattle yoke on his shoulders until another prophet came along and broke it off. Hosea married a prostitute and then left the lights on night after night after night, waiting for her to come home, stumbling home from work, smelling like other men. But perhaps the weirdest of them all was Ezekiel, who once ate a scroll that had been given to him and was rendered mute by God, leaving him to draw pictures of the coming siege of Jerusalem on a clay tablet, which he apparently laid down beside for 390 days. We have a word for this. He was homeless. Ezekiel baked his cakes using cow manure and used a sword, I repeat, a sword, to shave his head. There's more, much more, but to suffice it to say, we would institutionalize these people now for being mentally ill. That is, if we still had institutions for the mentally ill. But let's face it, if any of these characters set foot on this campus, somebody would say, call security. If you see something, say something. So here's your last question, and hopefully it will open us to some good discussion. I did not come here to talk to you for an hour. I'd like to hear really what you think. Is the challenge we face with the indisputable fact of global climate change a moral imperative? If it is, why is it? If it's not, why is it not? And a moral imperative, by the way, is defined as, quote, a strongly felt principle that compels a person to act. Do you feel strongly about this? That's what I want to know. And if you do feel compelled to act, how are we going to go about it? Who's got the time? You're in school, you've got papers to do, and books to read, and studies to complete. And you've got Facebook, which sucks millions of hours out of your life, because Facebook is the empire. It has algorithms that are designed to show you what you already believe, so you will buy things that people like you buy. And who among us can compete? I never get any laughs when I talk about Facebook. It just hits too close to home. And who among us can compete with corporations when it comes to battling climate change? Corporations are now people. You know that. Tom Foley would just turn over in his grave. Corporations are now people, as you know, and they have fundamental First Amendment rights, thanks to Citizens United, that decision. This is just how absurd things have become, assuming that any of us would recognize a corporation if we saw one walking down the street. So here's the question. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? We are already probably into the 6th grade extinction. We are doing ourselves in. And there is not very much time to save ourselves. So what role, if any, does faith play, or is that more negative than positive in this battle? And finally, if this is not the most important issue facing the human race, what is? What is more important than this? And with that, I turn the balance of my time, I yield the balance of my time, as Mr. Foley would say, over to you. And I'm anxious to hear, really anxious to hear, what you have to say, you who will inherit the future that we are now making. There may even be a prophet in this room. So let's talk to each other. Thank you very much. Do we hold up hands? How do we do this?
Yeah, just hold up hands. We have about 25 minutes or so, for Q&A.
Yeah, yes.
My only consideration is that you probably shouldn't put too much faith into a kid, because in the 1100s there was that children's crusade that didn't go anywhere.
That didn't go so well. Yeah. So we shouldn't put too much faith in children saving the world?
No, just I guess her specifically is what I was getting at.
Oh,
but,
her. Okay. You're talking about Greta. Okay.
Yeah. But in general, I guess my more deeper analysis, if I'm going to play devil's advocate here, wouldn't a lot of the problems like in Oklahoma and stuff just be handled through simple regulation? Like instead of putting the slick water back in, have them required to pump it out, put in concrete or mud?
It would be great if we could regulate the oil and gas industry in Oklahoma.
Right.
It would be great if we could do that.
Have you ever considered a class action lawsuit among all people affected by the earthquakes?
And then the judges, all of whom have been bought and paid for by the oil and gas industry, you have no idea what a stranglehold oil and gas has on the state where I live. You don't fight it and win. You don't even organize a protest against it that somebody's not out there taking names and figuring out who you are and then threatening your employment, which happened at the university where I teach. My dean organized a protest at Devon Energy Company, one of the largest oil and gas companies in the country, and was told if he ever did that again, he would not be the dean.
Well, that's interesting. So Oklahoma is basically a petrostate like Venezuela.
It's a petrostate. It is. It is a petrostate.
All right.
That's a good way to put it.
In that case, I guess you're gonna have to try and expand this out into if you can get them out more than one state to have these problems, you can probably organize it through.
Maybe so. I hate for them to pay that cost. That everybody's got to have earthquakes all the time, and their drinking water supply is going to be threatened. Our livestock is dying. We have done things because they were enormously profitable. I live in a city that's made millions off the new technology that can extract oil and gas from fields we thought were past their prime. It's really created this gold rush. And we're just now sort of starting to live with the environmental impacts. I don't know if any physicists in here, anybody into quantum physics or understand quantum entanglement, you should read about that because it will make you believe there's a whole new way to be a religious person. You don't have to believe a bunch of fairy tale doctrines, but you can believe in the connection of all things to all things, which will create awe and wonder in you. And then you will know that absolutely everything you do has consequences that chain out and change everything. So, as long as we know that, and we know that we're going to trade wealth for environmental degradation and possibly the end of a livable planet, then we'll say we want the money now, and whatever happens to our kids, we're sorry about that. I can't believe that that's really where we are as a species. I don't think we've been very well led to solve these problems, and that's why I think it really is up to you guys a lot to decide, for one thing, who leads the country next, and how you're going to handle a problem that we're already living with consequences, severe consequences, but it's actually moving faster than we thought. So what are you going to do? And why are you going to do it? Or are you going to say, I can't do anything, therefore I'm going to get on with my life? Which I would understand.
I have more, but I'll let someone else.
Okay. Just like class.
I've got something over here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I assume that most of us, maybe all of us, are on the same page on this matter, and socially responsible, and we think about this, we know about this, but I am a huge hypocrite on one aspect, and I think a lot of us here are as well, and that is I love to get on a plane, see the world, and I've got to have a huge carbon footprint because of that. And I have only the most pathetic solution to that. And I would love to have your comments on a better solution. My solution is that, well, instead of taking 3 trips a year, you take 1 trip a year.
Greta does not fly anywhere.
I know. She's
I flew to get here. So all that CO2 got pushed out of the tail of the plane when I was flying up here, and it will get pushed out when I fly back. So I know that this is not simple. I've tried to do some things in my own life that at least are a start, and I would like you all to consider that you can do some things that are tangible and doable now, and you will inspire other people. I mean, first of all, electric airplanes are feasible. An electric airplane can be built. And I have a son who's a pilot, so he's involved in pushing all this carbon out the tail of the airplane he flies, okay? But I bought an all-electric car that I plug in. Clearly, that electricity is not produced in ways that are completely clean, but I push no CO2 out of the back of my car when I travel. I put 15 solar panels on my roof to charge the car, so I'm at 0 emissions in the production of the electricity and 0 in the car when I drive it. Is that going to take care of the problem? No, that's infinitesimally tiny. Except I just happen to think that even very small things end up making a difference. And the electric car revolution's coming fast. 10 years from now, you will be astonished at how many fully electric cars are on the road, and trucks, and big earth-moving equipment, and combines, and it's coming fast. Volkswagen's going to reinvent itself as an electric car company, and it might as well, because its reputation as a regular car company is trouble. Right, yeah. So little things. Maybe if you can drive instead of fly, consider that option. Now you might say, well, someone else will just get my seat. And that's probably true. I mean, I think the thing about global climate change is that despair is always lurking just right outside the door. That nothing I do is going to really matter, so why should I do anything? I'll just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we're all going to die. That's a real problem. However, I don't think the human race is incapable of beginning to move quickly toward renewable energy and a more sustainable way of getting energy and using energy. We have the smarts to do that. And we used to think as a country we could do anything. We could make the world safe for democracy. We could land on the moon. We could do anything. Well, why now can't we get more carbon out of the air? Why can't we build something to suck it out of the air, which is a very, very promising possibility. She mentioned it. Although the technology is not there yet, that doesn't mean it's never going to be there. So we either just sort of give up, or we start moving in the right direction and see if we can't accelerate that and all kind of get on board. That's what I would say.
So people like Greta and Naomi Klein and a few others would say, would also say that we need collective action, that voluntary actions of individuals is not going to cut it.
Right.
That we need something akin to a World War III response. So we put all of our collective energy, and so when the prophets spoke, they usually spoke to the kings. They spoke to those who set policy, who made decisions on behalf of the nation,
Right.
not for individual, voluntary actions.
Right.
And so maybe you can speak to this too, the difference between justice and maybe charitable responses,
Right.
which are more highly individualistic.
Yeah. I think the powers that be, what the Bible calls the principalities and the powers, are very happy for you to be taking small individual actions and not pursuing systemic change. The corollary metaphor of the church is charity is great. You guys go out and feed homeless people and help poor people, but don't mess with the tax structure, or the way we organize our economy. Don't do any of those systemic things which might actually disadvantage rich people, for example. So I think you're absolutely right. But where's that going to come from? I'm 67 years old. And I'm asking you all to think about one thing, and that is to figure out how to restore the idea of the common good. To restore the common good. It's what really made us great. And there was a preacher, Jonathan Winthrop, who's famous for having compared America to a city on a hill. He said, America's a city on a hill. And then Ronald Reagan came along and added the word shining. You know about this. As in, America is a shining city on a hill. That's not what Winthrop said. And what Winthrop meant was, well, first of all, what Reagan meant was, we're up on this hill, we're shining, everybody looks at us and says, I want to live there. I want to live in the shining city on the hill. What Winthrop meant was, we're up here where everyone can see us, and if we fail to be our sister and brother's keeper, then everything will fall apart. Now, those are two completely different interpretations of the very same phrase, albeit altered by Ronald Reagan. So, collective action it's not either or. I think you should do individual things, and then I should think that you should involve yourself in collective action as well. And where do most movements start? They start on campuses. They could start right here. And you can do all your work, and you can still organize, and you can still do vigils, and you can still write your congressperson. You can still do that. You can reawaken the collective indignance that we need if we're going to address this problem. Okay, I'm talking too much. Somebody else. Yes?
Just a question.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this seems to boil down to the fact that our country and much of the world is run by corporations, which are now people, which are for profit,
Right.
which control everything. I get caught up in the despair, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you fight that? Do you see any kind of way to dismantle that system?
We would have to begin walking back the way in which we've created the world to be run by corporations. We would have to reverse that Supreme Court decision. That'd be a good place to start. And we'd have to decide that money would not be able to buy all the political power by doing campaign finance reform. Something Tom Foley was interested in, by the way. So, there are ways. We got ourselves into this place by a series of decisions we made. We can get ourselves out of this situation by making a series of different decisions. That's the hopeful point of view. I don't know if we can. I don't know anything. I just know that there's no acceptable alternative to hope. Right? I mean, otherwise, why get out of bed in the morning? Yeah. Yes.
Let me ask you a little bit about the politics in the Christian church in the United States, because, and the fact is that one of the biggest problems keeping us from addressing climate change is the Republican Party.
Right.
And their most staunch supporters right now are Christian Americans.
That's right.
And they've bought into a pact that says, look, you give us judges that will overrule Roe v. Wade and think differently about gay marriage and gay Americans. And we don't care what you do with
That's right.
with the environment.
We don't even
So
care.
how do you reform Christian America? That's
Well,
one
I
of
mean-
the real problems.
And the reform of Christian America has been my life's work. I don't know how well it's going, but I pastor a church that is a sanctuary church. It's a solar powered church. It was the first church in Oklahoma to start marrying same-sex couples. It's a place of unbelievable social justice energy output. Okay? All I can do is control that little part of my world in a very, very conservative state like Oklahoma. So I do that. And then I realize that all of you have a very negative opinion of religion, organized religion, for a very good reason. I don't blame you at all. I don't think if I was a millennial, I'd go to church these days. Because I look at the 82% of evangelicals who voted for Donald Trump, after telling us for years that character is what really matters. It's not policy. Everybody has different ideas about policy, but it's, are you a good human being? Like, do you treat women, if you're a man, with respect and dignity? Or do you insult people every day? Do you lie all the time? Do you not tweet others as you would like to be tweeted? So we have this total breakdown of the idea of what's virtuous. Studying Greek virtue theory, if any of you are philosophy majors, of course, we need to go back and figure out what makes a person a good person again. And really hold people to that. Because otherwise it's just about power. And you're right. The Christian right just said, we'll hold our nose, and we'll call this person King Cyrus, the flawed man that God's chosen to overturn Roe v. Wade. As long as we can stack the Supreme Court, get the deregulations that we want, the things that are keeping rich, powerful people from becoming even richer and more powerful. That's sheer rank hypocrisy. But I've got good news. Even the evangelical Christian world is breaking apart and fracturing over this very topic. They realize that they have behaved badly. And it's hurting them, and there are some people breaking away and moving in the direction of social justice and equality and an end to the hatred that's infesting the country and getting worse all the time. So the church is not a sort of monolithic thing. It's in fact very complex. It's just that still the vast majority of Christians have bought this illusion that to be evangelical, to be a follower of Jesus, is to vote family values, conservative family values. And meanwhile, the folks we elect pass legislation that makes things harder and harder on families all the time. I mean, first of all, the middle class is disappearing, right? This is Washington State University. How would you describe yourself in terms of class? Middle class, upper middle class? What do you think?
I have 85 cents.
What do you think? What do you think? Middle class? Lower middle class. Okay. Are you having trouble making ends meet? Are your parents having trouble sending you to school here? Are you accumulating debt here? Yes, no?
Yeah. That's what it's on. Yeah, I agree.
Well, things have got to change. Nobody should ever leave college owing 1 cent. Our society gets all the money back when we make sure people can go get a higher education. We get all that money back in productivity.
People don't know.
Huh? I'm sorry, I just heard somebody. I thought it was somebody wanted to say something. I thought, good. Yes.
So very nice talk, but if Greta were here and she heard you call her or liken her to a prophet, which
Right.
most of us think is someone that channels God,
Right.
What would Greta think of being
I,
likened to a prophet?
I don't know. I certainly wouldn't want to speak for Greta Thunberg.
Yeah. That's kind of my point.
Yes, and I realize that I've just given a talk, and that talks have, especially among young people, a sort of marginal value, okay? Because it sounds like, well, we've talked about some good things and we've been sort of righteous about it, but did that change anything? Well, Greta has been saying that you could say the very same thing about Greta. You're just going around the world giving very intense talks for a 16-year-old. What good is that going to do? Well, what good is that going to do? And whether she's a prophet in the biblical sense, I'm not saying. I'm just saying people have already denigrated her, have talked her down because they think she's not, I don't know, what's the word? Worthy. She's not normal. And she isn't normal. She will be the first to admit she's not normal. So when I looked at all those other prophets that are also very abnormal and strange, I thought, well, we've got a trend here. We've got a trend. And it turns out she's had more impact on people because she's strange. I mean, if she'd just been sort of a normal person giving a paper at a conference on global climate change, we wouldn't be talking about her, we wouldn't have watched the video. So I'm interested in how the truth gets itself out, especially at a time when you don't even know what's true and what's not. So,
I think talks are good because it gets you thinking.
Sure. I'm not, and I know you weren't putting down talk per talk, but it's certainly not all we have to do. Anybody in here want to argue that we're not experiencing global climate change? That it's not happening? And would be brave enough to do that? Because I'm not going to give you a hard time.
Can I make a modification to that? I'm skeptical of the solutions to climate change.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to, if you're skeptical, which you have every right to be, that does not free you from coming up with strategies about which you're not skeptical. So what are they? What are we going to do?
I don't buy into wind and solar. You can't store it, not easily.
Okay.
We're doing battery research, but that's going to take time.
Meanwhile, we have, say, about 10 years to get this thing really turned in a different direction. So if you're not into solar power or wind power or geothermal or whatever, what are you into? Are you into doing anything really?
I'm actually into nuclear.
You're into nuclear, okay? Okay. That's good to know. Maybe that can be part of the puzzle. I mean, it's got problems, we know that.
It's not a perfect solution, and it doesn't apply to everywhere. You need water sources.
There are no perfect solutions. We're going to put together a patchwork of things that all have disadvantages, but that make more and more energy in a way that is clean or cleaner. Okay, that is not putting more carbon into the air. If you listen to Greta give a long speech, she has a longer TED Talk, and I would recommend you listen. It's incredibly intelligent young woman. She's done her homework.
I also have one more other thing.
Yeah.
If you manage to make a carbon thing that manages to pull carbon out of the air, be careful how many you make, because if you pull out all the carbon out of the air, it's going to kill everything on the planet.
Yeah, we would die. Yes, we would die.
This gentleman over there had.
Somebody over here?
So I kind of have a personal, my efforts. I'm an ex-custodian, and I do this big old Zen exercise of picking up litter. Mm-hmm. The trouble is I do it with the wrong attitude, and I start getting pissed at everybody. And I wonder if they litter for secular reasons or religious reasons. Is your prosperity gospel?
Yeah.
I've got mine. Hell with the rest of you.
Yeah.
Or the world's going to end,
Anyway.
so we don't have to worry about it.
Right.
But,
Or if it's not going to end, it'll be because God doesn't want it to end.
and I'm wishing, why doesn't somebody just take a step like outlaw styrofoam?
Yeah,
I've seen that floating all the way around Washington.
sure.
I'm Washington, Oregon coast, and
Yeah.
and it doesn't. It's
So you can.
it gets smaller, but
Yeah,
it's going
it's
to
hard. It's hard to watch.
cause problems.
It's hard to watch. And the people most affected by global climate change now are poor people. So one of the things you might decide, if you were a person of faith and you think that one of the central manifestations of a faithful person is concern for the lost and the weak and the left out, then you'd have to be concerned about the effect of global climate change on poor people who are disproportionately living in the river deltas and in poor areas that flood because those are the only houses they can afford to buy. And every time there's another flood, and if you watch the news, it's just coming with greater and greater regularity. I think Houston is permanently underwater now. It's because there is so much more energy in the atmosphere, because there's so much more water vapor, that every weather event is simply more powerful. Whether it's a hurricane or tornadoes are occurring in places where they've never had tornadoes, and these kind of bomb cyclones and weather events that all meteorologists say are unprecedented. Every time you watch the news, it's somebody had a 100-year flood, and 2 years ago they had a 100-year flood. So we don't have a whole lot of time to get this turned around, and we're going to suffer the impact of it for a very, very, very long time. But remember that poor people suffer more than anyone else, and that wealthier people literally build their houses higher up and in places that don't flood, and they live behind walls with their own security force, their own people to come in and clean up. And that's how our society is moving. So if you want to be interested in religion, not in the way in which we discussed a moment ago, get interested in justice. Get interested in economic justice and equality and inclusion. Because you will seem strange to people if you say, one of the things my faith teaches me is I have to try to help people that have nothing to offer me, nothing to give back to me. Because most of us have been taught to be individual projects on our way to being successful. And everybody wants us to be successful. I want you to be successful. But then I have to ask, what's the definition of success? What does that really mean? Because you're only here for a very short time.
Okay, I'm afraid our time is about
Our time is up.
So before I ask you to join me in thanking our guests, let me remind you again, on Wednesday we have John Hibbing. He'll be here talking about the biology of politics. Should be a fascinating discussion. Now join me in thanking Robin Meyers.